everybody. This is Science Bridge webinar series, You Can Do It. And my guest today is an amazing man. His name is Atherton Mutombwera. He did his undergrad in pharmacy at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, and further he studied nanobiomedicine for his master's at University of Western Cape, as well as the Nelson Mandela University. Atherton also did his MBA at Oxford University in England, and now he is the CEO of Hutano Diagnostics, a company that is focusing on rapid diagnostic tests for diagnostic, tracking, and outbreak spread prediction, even up to date with COVID. So welcome, Atherton.
Thank you so much, Natia.
Well, I'm really appreciate your time here today with us, because I think that your path is quite unique, and our listeners can learn a lot from your experience. So let's just dive right into it. So your background in pharmacy, that's where you started. What pushed you to do that initially?
So I was always fascinated by medication, always fascinated by healthcare. I remember when we were children, we used to get all the medicine in the house and then mix it together and pretend we'd found the cure for AIDS. And but once you get a cure, you need to do a clinical trial, right?
Yes.
So we used to we'd go in the garage, we used to have pigeons. So we'd take the squabs, the baby pigeons in the garage as our clinical trial patients, and bring them outside, but we really never harmed them. I didn't have the heart to do it, so we'd put them back. So no animals were harmed in the process to becoming a pharmacist. But yeah, that's where it started. And then pharmacy was the next logical conclusion, at least at that particular moment.
And so you decided to then switch from pharmacy directly to nanobiomedicine. Can you tell us what even is nanobiomedicine?
Yeah, so I was in fourth year and I wanted to do a master's. And then our head of department came back to me and said, hey, I know you want to do a master's, but there's an opportunity open across the hall. So the School of Pharmacy is here. There's a corridor, and then the School of Biotechnology is on the other end. And essentially it was, do you want to do research? And the answer was yes. So then I was introduced to my then supervisor, Prof. Sakiru, and she essentially said, hey, there's a new program that's being rolled out between UWC, NMMU, UFS, and UJ. And essentially what's going to happen is it's a two-part program. The first 9 months you go to UWC and then you learn the theory around nanotechnology. It's 3 streams. There are people that are going to be doing physics, chemistry, and biology. So if you're doing biology, it's nanotechnology as well as biotechnology and biomedicine. So just that combination. And that's how I got into it. But essentially, it's a field around how do you use nanotechnology in healthcare.
And how do you use it? Because it's, something quite new. It's not a standard, you studied pharmacy or you studied biology. So what do you learn there? I guess nano, it's really something small, right? So small particles, is that the case?
Exactly. So how do you apply small things to healthcare problems? So if I think about it from my current bias, I think of it in terms of diagnostics as well as treatment. We'll talk about treatment so the interesting thing with nanotech is that when you make things really small, their characteristics change and you can start to manipulate them. So let's take it a step back and say, when you look at a stained glass window, if you look at a cathedral, the churches, there's always the drawings, the pictures. Sometimes the pictures are blue, sometimes they're red. And the blue and the red is due to gold nanoparticles. So the people back then who doing nanotechnology just wasn't called that, it was probably called stained glass windows. But those are nanoparticles. Same type of nanoparticles you see in a pregnancy test or in a COVID test are the same ones that are in that stained glass window. So it's a technology that's been there for a while, but not really applied as much. So now in healthcare, you have it in terms of, let's talk about treatment. The question then becomes, if you want to have something like more targeted treatment, think of a cancer patient. Instead of giving the patient the medication, you could take the medication and package it in very small very small little balls. And those little balls will only be released at the site of the cancer and not everywhere else in the body, which means that you have less side effects. So that's one example of how you use nanotech in treatment. You can also use it in diagnostics. For example, you could take the same concept and accumulate a set of nanoparticles only where the cancer is. And then you'll be able to pick it up, say, on CT scan or something like that. An interesting thing with the kinds of cancer we're talking about is that the blood vessels around the cancer tissue, they are very leaky. They have big holes in them. So your nanoparticles will travel along the normal blood vessels, no problem, but they'll actually leak into the tissue where there's those holes in the blood vessel. And that's why you get the accumulation for either the treatment or the contrast for your diagnostic. You can also apply nanotech to diagnostics such as the ones that we do. So when you look at a pregnancy test or a home COVID test or an HIV test and you see that line, the blue or the red line, it's actually a result of gold nanoparticles being squashed together into the same space. So it's a broad number of applications in healthcare, but also quite interesting because I think it's got a lot of potential.
No, that sounds like quite a lot of potential, from cancer treatment to detection of pregnancy and even COVID or other viruses. So that's quite a broad spectrum of applications. But can you tell us then, where does the MBA comes in place? Because suddenly you had the switch in your studies from pure medicine, let's say, to more business side.
I think what happened was the first time I set foot in a biotechnology lab, I was wowed. To be honest, it blew my mind because I'd been practicing. I'd learned as a pharmacist, practiced as a pharmacist, and you know the problems you have on the ground. But when I got into the field into the lab, you speak to people that are doing research projects on different things, and you just realize the impact that this would have in people's lives. Um, back at that time, I feel old now, but back in that time, one of the things that was quite recent was the ability to do PCR at a single temperature. And they were starting to have whispers around CRISPR. Well, it had been there for a while, but at least that's when I started to learn about it. And so the question that I had was, I'm familiar with the problems on the ground. I've seen that the technology exists. It needs a bit of a push and resources, but it's there. So the question was now then, how do you get this into people's hands? And the gap there was the MBA, because there's the technology is there, the problem is there, but the gap is the business. So the question was, how do I learn the business principles? How do I take technologies that are in development and get them into people's hands?
So how did it happen that you were studying in Cape Town or in South Africa in general, but then you did your MBA at Oxford University?
So I came across the Oxford team when I was in Cape Town. So they tended to do these events where they would invite a lot of people from South Africa, people who were within the South African circle. So I met them in Cape Town first. And I met them in Cape Town. I think the first time I met the team from Oxford was in 2000 and it was in 2014. And I just ended up at an event. A friend had invited me and I listened to them speak. I really didn't take it seriously because I didn't think I'd be able to make it to Oxford. And then 2015, I was invited to a breakfast again. And this time I went by myself. And when I got there, they said, "Hey, we've seen you. This is the second time. What are your plans?" And I said, "I think I want to come, but I don't know if I can." And they were really helpful. And I think that experience helped me to realize that I also had something to contribute to the conversation, which is quite interesting because when we're talking with the team from Oxford, they were saying that they pride themselves on a diverse class. And what they're trying to say is that they want to have people from different fields as well as different backgrounds to come into class and evaluate a problem that has been put forward, for example, case study from different points of view. And as someone who has a point of view that is unique, you also contribute and help your classmates to learn. And that helped me to then realize that actually it's quite an interesting space, that this is a space that I'd like to spend more time in. So that's how I learned about Oxford. And then I went through the application process and then the interview process. And then, yeah, got a place to study. So it was, the process is that they are multiple rolling applications for the MBA program. So it's preferential for you to apply during the first two or first three. I'm just talking about Oxford now, because then you also have access to scholarships. If you are a late applicant, then the scholarship decisions have already been made, so you miss out on that. That's if you want a scholarship to study here.
Yeah.
So it's a online application, really easy to do. The only thing that you need to do is you need to do a GMAT. GMAT is a test of English and math, but English and math in a different way. It's all about, in fact, you can practice for this. So it's a simple math, but you just don't have the time to do it as you do it as diligently as you typically would. So you need to learn how to make decisions what seems to you to be the right decision in a short amount of time. So that's what the GMAT is about. So if you write the GMAT and then you make the application, that's essentially all that there is. Then they'll ask you to write a one-page CV. It's a really easy application. If one is intending to do it, I'd advise to take 3 months to study the GMAT and do about 2 hours a day, because it looks like it's simple. It's not. It's really not. So you want to practice it, yeah.
So it's the application process, but then you said that if you apply as one of the first applicants, then you still have access to scholarships. So that will provide you with funding to move to UK and fund the program.
So depending on so what I meant by that is the business school itself has multiple closing dates. At the time, it had 6 closing dates for applications for one class. And at the time, the last application you could make for scholarship consideration was December. And your school term would start in October. So there's a cohort that's actually just come in now. So what I meant by that is that a lot of the scholarships still have their applications open during the December time. So as you're applying for the Oxford MBA, you can also just tick on a scholarship, and then you may be invited for an interview, or you may not. But it makes it a lot easier. And then the scholarships are very different depending on what you're applying for. Assuming a student from South Africa, I'm now out of my depth, but assuming a student from South Africa, you're looking at the Rhodes Scholarship, but you have to be under a certain age. You need to check what that is. Then the second is you're looking at Shivling Scholarship, Clarendon Scholarship, Commonwealth Scholarship, and then a Weidenfeld Hoffman Trust Scholarship. And then I think there's one that I always forget, but it is recommended through university by the chancellor. That one's always an interesting one. I always forget the name. But those are the sets of scholarships they are. So they tend to be full scholarships, which means they cover your tuition and your board. So you get a stipend. They pay the school, and then they pay you money per month or every quarter of a year, depending on the scholarship.
Yes.
Typically, there's a couple of them that help you to relocate from wherever you are to come to Oxford. Some don't. So there need to be an understanding of which scholarship does what.
Yes. No, of course. And because it's a Master's of Business and Administration, MBA, so do you have to have your undergrad already completed, but you don't need your master's to be completed? How does it work? Can you do it just from undergrad?
Yeah, so you can do it from undergrad. Now that depends, because some MBA programs want you to have experience. Some are not as big on experience, but they want to propel you forward. So you want to know which business school to go to. I've actually come across a couple of people who've done their MBA without an undergrad, but they were well versed in the field that they were in.
Yeah.
So that was quite an interesting experience for me.
So moving on from the MBA, because then you were at Oxford, you had some different exposures to different people. All of that has been due to your networking thus far. So what happened that you decided to start your own company?
So when I was doing the masters in Cape Town, the idea was make a lateral flow test, so like a home COVID test or home pregnancy test, but make it for Ebola. And the idea was to be able to make Ebola diagnostic tests that can be stored in a, so this is 2014, right? There's been an Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Let's make an Ebola test that can be kept in a house, no need for refrigeration for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Given the current tests need to be refrigerated and they expire after 2 years. And then so that was the research that I was doing in Cape Town. And then the next third process was communities are not prepared for pandemics. So let's make a set of diagnostics that prepares them. Because the Ebola problem is very similar to and is very similar to the Lassa fever problem, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, chikungunya. It's actually a group of diseases that are there in the African region. So how do we protect? Marburg virus is another one of them. How do you protect against those? And so the idea was build a company that makes essentially pandemic preparedness for the African continent. And so the purpose of the MBA was to convert that scientific idea into a business idea. And so that's what I essentially came to Oxford to learn how to make a company that makes lateral flow tests. So everything I learned in the MBA was focused towards that. And then the MBA was really helpful because I met a group of people that I worked with. It was called the Entrepreneurship Project. So essentially, as students, you're put in a group, you chose your group, and then you work with people to take a business idea and to develop it. So I worked with a couple of colleagues, really, Tony, Alex, Dakuna, Christy, and those guys were just essentially the driving force behind Hutano as we were doing our studies. At the end of the process, at the end of the MBA, we ended up with hundreds of business cards. We met a lot of people, but most importantly, we actually had the framework for what Hutano would become.
So when in the process of building up towards your company, what would you think are the most important aspects of entrepreneurship?
I think naivety is good. I think naivety is good because, no, I'm actually very serious about it because there are certain things that I did that if I look back then, I think that was a very big risk. For example, I just finished my year here at Oxford and then I just stayed. I didn't have a job that was paying me. And I was fortunate enough to meet someone who said, hey, do you want to housekeep for me? I'm leaving the country and, you can just housekeep keep my house safe. That for me was amazing. But sometimes if you're not willing to try some things, then certain opportunities don't come about. So that's how I ended up just staying in Oxford. And then we raised investment. But essentially what I'm trying to get to, I've been listening to someone a lot who says that foolishness is the precursor of wisdom. When you start on a journey, it's seldom that you are wise and you know everything in that field, but you're actually quite foolish, naive, and quite vulnerable, frankly. But just being willing to put yourself in that position where I don't know everything, I don't know anything, but I want to actually learn it. And I realizing that there's a risk that comes with it, then that's what I think was quite helpful.
No, it's quite a big risk that you're taking when you are starting your own company. So it's out of the comfort zone of having the month-to-month paycheck, to be honest.
Yeah.
So you had the background in nanobiomedicine, and you had the background in MBA. So then the next steps of creating the company was what exactly? Getting the funds, or what was first?
I thought it was getting the funds. That's what I thought it was. I see now that it wasn't. The next step was to actually create a company structure, right? Which is what do you want to do as a company? And at the stage that you only have an idea, then the question is, what is a company? And a company is a series of the technological thought process, right? What is the tech that you want to do? Is it possible? And do people want it? And then there's also the considerations for business, which will it be profitable or not? And that links to if someone puts money into this company, how do they get their money back? And then the last piece is the administrative piece, which I think, at least if I look back at it, was the most important for us to actually close our first round of investment. The administrative piece is, if we get the money, how does this company work? What are the checks and balances that the company will have? Who's on the board of directors to make sure that we're making the right decisions from a technological standpoint, from the financial standpoint, from a legal standpoint? Who's helping me to build this? And if I look at it backwards, dots always connect backwards, right? If I look at it backwards, the most important thing that we did was to build a board of directors for the company. Because it's that board of directors that then helps other people to realize that you kind of have an idea of what you're doing. So we built a board of directors, and it was that board of directors that helped us to actually say, hey, for this company to make sense, these are the milestones you need to pursue. But once you know what your milestones are, for example, if your milestones are, it's like writing your thesis, right? You know what your aims are, and then you can break that to objectives, and then you can break that to actual activities. And it's the same thing with a company. What do we want to do? We wanted to prove the concept that you can make a lateral flow device using the technology that we had developed. So that was our process. So what are the steps that we need to take? These are the following steps for research. These are the following steps for business. What are the activities that need to be undertaken? How much does that cost to do it? How much money do we need to raise? What does it take for us to commercialize it? How much money and how many people do we need to be able to get to a point where we have a profitable company? Again, same concept as when you're writing the thesis, but just applying it to, so the scientific method that just applied to a business.
Okay, so when you're writing your thesis, you have your supervisor to assist you maybe with your milestones. Who was your assistant in creating the company then? Did you have a mentor?
So it's the board of directors.
Okay.
It's the board of directors, and the board of directors are specially dedicated mentors, if you would like to put it like that. So they are your professors who you engage with as you continue to build a company. But bearing in mind, much as someone who's writing a thesis, if you don't want to do the work, then they can't force you, right? And success largely depends on your own actions. So that there is that element of you need to know what you want to pursue it. But these are very intelligent, very busy people. And you're either going to use the time that they allocate to you well, or you're going to waste it. So it's up to you to actually make the most out of it.
No, fantastic. I think that this is quite important to know for everybody who actually wants to start their own business. And importantly, it is possible to create a business that it's African focused, like yours. So what does your day-to-day look like as a CEO of a company? Because I see you're in the lab right now.
Yeah. So I tend to break my life in terms of the season that we're in as a company. So in large part, there are two seasons that always overlap. But the first season is the R&D season, which is experiments. We've got to reach our milestones so that we can progress as a company, move from one stage to the next, raise funding, whatever it is we want to do. And then the second stage is the fundraising stage. So we are currently making the migration from the lab stage to the R&D stage to the fundraising stage. So for the past few weeks, my life was wake up, come into the lab, do experiments, come back, do it again, share them with our board of, with our director who's in charge of R&D, discuss what's the next step forward, and then continue that whole process. Currently, we are trying to make the migration from that R&D process to the fundraising process. So now we are taking the lab results we've gotten, we're taking the market insights we generated, as well as the intellectual property we've developed, and we're building it together into a pitch deck so that we can share it with people for investment. And typically your investment journey takes you about 6 months, because you don't meet someone, a stranger, and tell them I'm doing this and they give you money today. It takes time to build that relationship. So that process then means that if you think of just two different graphs on the same axis, as our R&D, which is here, is starting to go down, it's not stopping. It's just going down. Then our fundraising is going up. So you start to realize that at a certain point, both are moving forward, but it's all about allocation of time. I think one of the issues is always about, at least in our mind, it's always about milestones.
Yes.
What is our milestone? What is our target as a company? Is that target still relevant? And then the next piece of the question then becomes that once you know that the target you're pursuing is now relevant, what are the set of actions that allow you to achieve it? So at a certain point, you realize that you're much closer to your technical R&D milestone than you are to your fundraising. So you need to put more pressure on the fundraising, less on the R&D milestones. And then eventually you get where you want to get. So it's always about what's our target, and if it's still relevant, what's the best way for us to achieve it.
No, that's absolutely interesting because it kind of ties nicely with the fact that your background is both the nanobiomedicine pharmacy / MBA. So you constantly, I guess, your life is floating between those two phases. And you actually, as everybody can see, you don't leave the lab permanently becoming a CEO. You're still there. You're still hands-on in science.
Yeah, I think some of the best. So I think some of the best CEOs for biotech companies are people who have experience in the lab, because it allows you to set realistic targets for your team. There's nothing as frustrating as someone setting a target for you and they don't know what it takes to get there. I'm not saying let's not be aggressive. Of course, we're going to be aggressive with our targets, but a little knowledge of what it takes to get there is always important.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And for the closing, what would you say to people who are afraid of graduation? And I guess some of our viewers might be thinking like, gosh, I don't know what I want to do in future and what I should be doing and how to approach it. What would be your advice?
I think not knowing is a good thing. I think not knowing what you want to do, who you want to be, is a very good thing. Because the kind of person who tends to gravitate towards our field is the person who, once they've picked a campus point to go towards, they are very relentless about it. So picking a campus point for the sake of picking it might be dangerous, because you end up in a space where you don't want to be in. So maybe spending more time within that discomfort. It's uncomfortable not knowing what you're doing, but spend more time in that area of discomfort and figure out what it is that you think is important to you and understand why it's important to you. If it takes you a long time, let it take you a long time, because you will know that once you know what it is that's important to you and what you want to do, then go for it. It sounds a bit unusual, but we went through a similar process as a company. We went through a pivot recently, and that was it. The focus was spend time in that discomfort, not knowing what you're going to apply your technology to. But once you figure it out, you can then just run, you can chase after it. But it's okay to not know what you want to do. And besides, if you look at it in the grand, it's a terrible way of looking at things. But if you look at yourself as a human being, you think you're quite important. You look at yourself in the broader space of all the people within South Africa, you realize you're important, not that important. Think about the world's population, 7 billion, more than 7 billion people. You realize, maybe not that important. Look at it in the broader space of the earth. There are animals, there are ants, there are bees. You're just like that one little thing. And I'm not saying that to say you're not important, to say I'm not important, but it always helps me to put things into perspective, to realize that I must take things seriously, but I shouldn't take myself too seriously.
Having a distance to yourself and to your goals, and career can be changing all the time. So even if you once choose something and you then decide it's not what you want to do, it's always something that you can learn from and move on, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. I think a lot of our viewers could get a lot of very important information about building on company and how to actually have the proper mindset for becoming a CEO of a company.
Thank you so much.